Great. All right, well, I'm going to open up to the respondents, and I'm going to start with Phyllis. So, Phyllis, you heard today you have two different proposals, but I think that both Pamela and Hank think that their plans can increase coverage better than what exists today. Is that putting words in your mouth, or you think that that's true? And they both believe that they can get more money into the system to at least achieve more adequacy, especially for low and moderate wage earners, correct? For 25, 30 years, maybe more, we've been hearing all kinds of proposals to increase coverage and adequacy. Do you think that these proposals, Phyllis, can move the needle toward achieving those ends?
I think that's a really good question, and the answer is I don't know. I commend all of the people that worked on these proposals because I do think that they're very interesting proposals. But I'm sort of old-fashioned, and I think that pension plans are sold, not bought. And one of the reasons that we've had this proliferation of different retirement vehicles, but nothing's been successful to move the needle, because we're just about where we were when ERISA passed, depending on how you cut the numbers in terms of coverage. And I think we may have fallen behind, actually, in adequacy because of the shift away from traditional pension plans to DB plans and the various problems with our investment in our economy. But having said that, let me come back. Plans are sold, not bought. So the question I have for both of these panelists, and I'm sorry I wasn't here to hear the earlier panel, is what is this about your plan that you think will make it, A, much more attractive? And who's going to go out there and sell it? Who's going to sell it? What is their incentive? How will they encourage employers, particularly small employers who, the low-hanging fruit, I think, has been harvested.
Do you want them to answer now?
No, let me go through my couple of comments. The second thing is that everybody who deals with these issues, myself included, because I have to admit a partiality for Hank's approach, because it's similar to an approach that I myself have been thinking about since the early 80s. Although I never had the states in the picture, I really was using a multi-employer plan because I think it's a terrific model for aggregating small employers. But the problem with all of these proposals is the big selling point is no fiduciary responsibility for the small employers. And that's a wonderful bumper sticker. But as a practical matter, we spend an extraordinary amount of our resources at the Department of Labor, our enforcement resources, chasing employers, primarily small employers, but really employers of every size, who dutifully withhold from their employees' checks their contributions on behalf to their health plan or to their pension plan. And those contributions sort of never quite make it to their destination. So I think any proposal, whether it's one of these proposals or any other proposals, has got to come to grips with that. It's one thing to say fiduciary responsibility, we're going to relieve employers, but as long as employers are still in the system and responsible for making payroll deductions in order to get the contributions to whichever of these programs or any other program, we need to fix that problem. So, and along the lines of the no fiduciary responsibility, both of these proposals talk about how there won't be reporting and disclosure. I assume that you don't really mean that. I assume what you mean that the reporting and disclosure requirements is shifted to the administrative entity and that the individual employers aren't going to be responsible, because I can't imagine a system in which we just let all this money slosh around with no reporting to the government, no accountability, no reporting to participants and beneficiaries. So I assume that that's what you mean. I know that Pam just addressed another issue, which is access to the leakage question, access to money prior to retirement. And again, this is an issue that we've been fighting over or pondering over or disagreeing about for many years, certainly in the discussions that the conversation on coverage, the working group that I was in the dealing with defined benefit plans. There was a lot of discussion about how whether or not there would be less of an incentive for people in a voluntary system to contribute to a plan if they couldn't get their money out. We have seen what the effect of allowing people to get money out prior to retirement is, and it isn't pretty. Because now we're thinking about ways to fix that problem. So I think that's a really important issue that needs to be addressed. As I understand the super simple, you can get your own money out, but you can't get the government contribution or the employer contribution. I don't know whether that's a big enough bang for your buck, but I will quote again somebody that I quoted a couple of weeks ago and who I still have a great deal of admiration for, and that's Bob Stone, the longtime benefit administrator for IBM. And many, many years ago in a hearing room quite like this, but over on the other side, when I was a House staff person, we had a hearing on what was then the Hines-Clay bill. And one of the things that we did in the bill was try to lock up money because this leakage problem was a real problem. And we had a panel about of plan sponsors, benefit experts, in which every witness except Bob Stone said, we have to let people freely have access to their money in their 401k plan, otherwise they're not going to put their money in. And I may have the numbers wrong here because I'm old and feeble and can't remember things anymore, but Bob Stone's testimony was at IBM, and of course that was the old IBM where they thought that they had a paternal responsibility to take care of their employees. At IBM, we don't let people get money prior to retirement. And the number that he cited for participation was, I believe, somewhere in the 70s. So I think it's all the way that you frame this. If people understand how important retirement income is, they'd be less likely to be concerned about locking up their money for retirement. But I think that's an issue that has to be talked about. And finally, adequacy. I think I'm probably least confident that any of these proposals will lead to more adequate retirement income, because all of them rely on the decision of people to save, which, although we've made tremendous strides over the past couple of decades in encouraging people to save, they do require that. The auto enrollment and auto escalation provisions mitigate that somewhat. I'd be interested to hear what these plans contemplate as a goal for adequacy, replacement rate, and I think I'll just stop there. I'm probably over my 5 minutes.
Okay, I'm going to let Pamela and Hank respond to a few of these things, and then I'm going to go to Don. Okay, so there were a few issues that Phyllis asked about. One was, are your plans adequate? Yep. There was also the question of who's going to sell these, who's buying these plans? Because we learned this in the conversation on coverage.
IRAs took off because of financial services institutions.
Right.
Saw it as a huge money-making opportunity. Yep.
And then
so
also,
who's going to sell?
And then Pamela, I think there was one question to you about the reporting requirements. I think in your plan, the reporting requirements are offloaded, but you actually get rid of a whole bunch of them. So if you could do this in a few short minutes, if you guys could talk about adequacy, and then I'm going to hit to you, Don, about whether you think employers are going to buy these plans. So let's hear from these.
So in terms of adequacy, again, if you look at the chart on page 18, we envision that, and this has been modeled and stress tested, that if you participate in Secure Choice, that with Social Security, with personal savings and Secure Choice pensions, you get to about 84% replacement rate, which I think that is, within the sweet spot of adequacy. Selling, we view this, one of the analogies we like to use when we talk about Secure Choice is the 529 college savings plans that's sponsored by the state. Initially, a lot of people didn't know what to make of it, but as people became familiar with the concept of a state-sponsored savings program for college, people loaded up on it. And we feel that there's a lot of analogies between secure choice pensions and the 529. So we think that's a sell. In terms of making sure that the contributions that are withheld actually make it to the plan, we feel that states are incorporated, or I'm sorry, businesses are incorporated at the state level. There's a lot more nexus and interaction between states and corporations versus state and the federal government. So we think there's naturally better ways of making sure that the contributions do make it. And in terms of leakage, this is a pension plan. This is not a wealth accumulation plan. We do not allow for lump sum distributions. We do allow for de minimis distribution if they happen to, say, somewhere around maybe less than 5,000 or 10,000, but everything else stays in the system. Your account is always active.
Okay. Pamela, if you could just address adequacy and the reporting requirements?
Sure. Well, first of all, in terms of who's going to sell Super Simple, I think the financial services industry, to the extent more assets for retirement are generated, would be selling it. Second, we have not done away with the role of the Department of Labor in terms of protecting employee interests to make sure that contributions promised are made and that the money is invested under fiduciary standards. Third, in terms of leakage, the reason we put in the access to funds for workers for their own savings is because we recognize that low and moderate income people often do not participate in the mainstream financial system, and that this is one opportunity for them to get the benefits that people do outside. And in terms of adequacy, we did not, the numbers that we put out in our paper are really more principle-based than in terms of hard and fast calculations, so we are very open to modifying them.
Well, to the extent that both of these plans use professional asset managers, asset management, I can't help but think that there will be some bump up in the return.
Okay, that's great.